Two requests to speak, Elaine Golden-Geeler and Rosario Perry. You each have 3 minutes.
Good evening. Okay, so I hope that City TV is ready. We're all concerned about rent-burdened tenants who can lose their homes because they can't afford their rent. That made me wonder how many were evicted in 2017. So I did some research, and this is what I found. Out of the approximately 26,000 rent-controlled units in Santa Monica in 2017, there were a total of 102 evictions. When I drilled down even further into the 2017 stats, I discovered that out of the 26,000 units with 102 evictions, I was surprised to find only 12 were related to non-payment of rent, which I think we can all agree represents an insignificant number, a number representing less than 0.04%. I've yet to determine how many of the 12 evictions in 2017 were of market rent tenants and how many were of historically low rent burden tenants. But I can make a wild guess that the number could be as low as 0. Here are my observations about rent burden tenants based on my 40 years as a housing provider. 1, some get help from relatives. 2, some get roommates. 3, some work for cash that's not reported. But that won't stop the rent board, the city council, the housing commission from overstating the issues related to tenants who they label as rent burdened. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rosario Perry, you have 2 minutes. It was scratched out for 2 because you were on another item, so which one? I've got, oh, sorry, they're switched.
Okay.
The 9 looks like a 7 and the 7 looks like a 9.
All right, so I'll take 3 now, and if I'm called on the second one, I'll take 2.
All right.
3 first. All right, so I'd like to thank you very much. I'm sorry for the informal attire. It's so hot outside. When the board files a lawsuit, it affects the city's economy as well as the politics, and mostly it affects the supply of housing. So I want to talk to you about the theory of litigation right now. The board decides or should decide what lawsuits will be filed, what legal positions it should take. When it does that, I really think it should give study to what the consequences are, the ramifications. In many ways, running the board is like running a business. You're the trustees, you have a responsibility to the investors. In our case, the investors are people that were mandatorily required to pay fees to run the organization. That's the housing providers as well as the tenants. It's a stronger responsibility than a private board would have, because a private board is running a government, or is running a company where people voluntarily invest. Here, we're forced investors. So you have to be especially careful. So you owe a duty to not only the tenants, but housing providers to act fairly, as well as consistently, is what my position would be. I suggest that before the board decides to take legal positions in litigation, again, it studies the position, especially when your position is going to contradict 30 years of prior board position, which is opposite. So here's the case. there's two lawsuits that have been filed, one against Corrigan and one against Gerges. In each case, the board has taken a contrary position for many, many years. And all of a sudden, these two people were sort of like attacked, ambushed, if you would, and a new position was put forward. In Gerges, we're thinking it's a test case, but in Corrigan, the poor guy was told by the board that he would have Category C exemption. He spent hundreds of thousands of dollars fixing up dilapidated units, and he went back into business. And all of a sudden, after many, many years, the board decided those units should be controlled. So that led to litigation, and you can imagine the judge was somewhat perplexed as to why the board would change its position after so many years and after so much money had been spent in reliance on the board's prior position. So I think it's important for consistency on the board's position. It helps the housing providers invest money in housing, restoring housing, and it establishes, I think, goodwill between the housing providers as well as the tenants and the board. So in the future, I think one of the main things the board should think about before it elects to file lawsuits is, does it change our position? Should it be applied ex post facto, retroactively, or should we pass a regulation and apply it going forward? We'll change our position, we'll give everybody notice of our new position, and we'll apply it forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And you might as well stay close, Mr. Perry, because we are closing public comment and moving on to the consent calendar, but you have pulled a chit for public comment on the consent calendar, and if there's no prior discussion, we'll hear from the public first. Please step up. And you.
On item 5. Am I correct?
9.
9. Okay, fine. So this is a little bit. This is 2 minutes. This is a little bit about Matt Gerges. I'm not going to take your time to discuss the values of the case and the merits, but here's a case where Mr. Gerges, like every other owner who's gone before him for 32 years, had Ellis's property and for some other reason decided to come back in the market, and following board practice for the last 32 years, came back and did not offer the ex-tenants right of return. Now, if the law is unclear, there's going to be a fight about it, of course, that's fine. But for 32 years, as well as the board's staff writing a declaration of what the policy was from the board, you all of a sudden change your mind on this one guy. It's like you've caught a tiger by the tail in a way. The last guy you want to pick on, I think, is Matt Gerges. So he's in the process now. He thinks he's being treated very unfairly. He's in the process now of hiring a large firm in Century City. He's going to file a class action lawsuit. That's what he's planning to do. And so what do you have? You have, I think, you have a decision to change your position without much thought, unfairly affect a lot of people who have been relying on your position. And now you're going to have to have, I would imagine, hire outside counsel. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in attorney's fees. If he's successful, and I think he might be, who knows, you subject the board wealth to huge damages. And so my question is, have you taken this action with some thought? Why would you fight this issue on a new matter? Why not apply it to future cases if you want to change your position after 32 years, but not talk about millions of dollars in damages that possibly can come out in this lawsuit? I'm done.
You have a question for the speaker?
What is your interpretation of our board regulation 1625 then?
So it's very clear. If you can't take one regulation out of place, you have to read all the regulations.
And the government code.
That's right. So my position is consistent with a rent board staff attorney's declaration in a prior lawsuit that says, if you look at 7060.2C, if you come back after 2 years, the maximum penalty would be 6 times the monthly rent. That's the maximum penalty. Now, if you look at B, which says if you come back within 2 years, then it says a penalty would be 6 times the rent. But the rent board has authority to file a lawsuit, and the tenant has authority to file any type of other lawsuit he wishes. So you see there's a difference in treatment and language between B, where you come back within 2 years, and C, where you come back after 2 years. When you come back within 2 years, the board has authority to sue, the tenant has authority to sue, other than, in addition to the punitive damages. When you come back after 2 years, which is C, the board has no authority, there's no authority granted it, and the tenant has no authority other than to sue for the 6 times the monthly rent. So that's exactly what the issue is in this case.
Okay, I respectfully disagree, but thank you.
Yeah, but my point is, you're talking
and
about
you're-
millions of dollars.
Our time
in
is up.
damages.
Thank you very much.
And we're also talking about doing the right thing.
All right, we have a consent calendar item before us. Can I have a motion to accept the consent calendar?
Oh, we need a motion?
Uh-huh.
I certainly move that we accept the recommendation to reject the claim and allow our team to move forward.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor? Or do we need to do a roll call?
Yes.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Flora?
Yes?
Commissioner Trosis?
Yes.
Commissioner Foster?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, moving on to 10A, 1 and 2. I would, since these are rather straightforward, unless either of you have an inclination to pull either one of them and hear, we do have a request to speak. But can I just ask, Mr. Lax, you're the applicant? Just a moment. You're the applicant? Yes, okay. So I was going to entertain a motion to grant both exemptions. Is there a motion?
Oh, I thought you were going to make it.
I will if you'd like me to. I like to usually let other people make them. But
Very generous, but go ahead.
all right, I would move that we accept both items 10A, 1 and 2 and follow the staff's recommendations of granting both exemptions. Sure.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I agree,
Well, second
but
and then discussion.
is there, just from a protocol standpoint, is there a reason that both of these aren't on the same agenda, or are we going to be seeing an increase in this type of petition given a potential Costa-Hawkins repeal?
No, there's no relation to Costa-Hawkins appeal. It just happens that these two were filed when they were filed, and we're bringing it to you in the appropriate manner.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So there's been a motion and a second. We call the roll.
Commissioner Trosis?
Yes.
Commissioner Flora?
Yes,
Commissioner Foster?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Both properties are exempted. Thank you.
but if I may, Madam Chair, if Mr. Lax wants to come and heap praise
Certainly.
on us or anything like that,
All of you have all of the admiration that I could muster. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. All right, moving on to 10B, new construction exemption. And I would, for one, think that just so the public understands, we don't see these very often, that we hear the staff report on this one and fire it away.
Commissioners, this is exemption case 1774. The applicant is Community Corps Santa Monica, and the property in question is 430 Pico Boulevard. Back in 2010, the board agreed to let Community Corps remove 14 control units and 5 different properties on Pico to build a 32-unit affordable housing project. All the units available to the residents were to be below 60% of area median income and corresponding rents set under the HUD and state guidelines. That building was completed and received a certificate of occupancy as a new construction in June 2013. In accordance with the removal permit agreement with the board, Community Corps registered 14 of the units as rent control units. That left 18 units that had to be addressed in our database. Then this application addresses those 18 units. The rent control law exempts units constructed after 1979 unless the units replace control units removed under a removal permit, like the 14 that I had mentioned before, or are new units constructed on an Ellis property that was rented within 5 years. And this property was obviously not Ellis since it had been removed. Neither exception applies to these 18 units, all of which were built after 1979. Therefore, these units meet the requirements for a new construction exemption, and staff recommends that the board approve the application and adopt the proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law.
All right, is there any discussion? Commissioner Flora?
yeah, I just wanted to make sure, I think I heard it in your description, but their units are empty.
This is a project, this is an affordable housing project that was built back in 2013. I presume that they're not empty, actually. I presume that they're rented to low-income tenants.
Oh, okay.
So what we're essentially doing, Commissioner, is we're doing some cleanup of the database. We have to account for these 18 units that are sitting there, and they either have to be subject to rent control or exempted from rent control. Since the 14 that are to be subject to rent control and the removal permit agreement already have been registered as such, these are the 18 that are left, and and we
Yes.
asked them to apply for this exemption so that we can take care of that.
I read this over the weekend, and I think I didn't think it had been built yet. I missed the year. Thank you.
Commissioner Torosis?
Did we get clarification as to what type of affordability covenants are on the property? Like what levels of AMI do the units have to be restricted to?
What we do know is that they are at 60% or below.
On average?
No, 60%. All the units have to be 60% or below according to removal permit agreement.
Okay, and was there any reason why all of them couldn't be subject to rent control?
Yes, the removal permit agreement itself specifies, as with board practice, that the number of units that are removed that are controlled are the number of units that are subject to the rent control once the new property is built.
And so if we have 14 people living in there at 60% of AMI or below, I'm just curious as to how them being under rent control makes a difference versus those who are not under rent control if all of them have to be inherently affordable. Aren't they all low rents theoretically?
Yes, they
so
all-
theoretically, does it really matter if there are HUD guidelines about what the rents can be?
I can't tell you for a fact whether in an individual circumstance the rent increase might be more or less in a rent control situation than in a HUD situation, but it's the lesser of the two.
Right. Yeah, I assume we can't go over HUD guidelines if it's a HUD-funded property. Okay, thanks.
All right. Hearing no other discussion, I would move that we grant this exemption. Verify staff's report and bring it under rent control and exempt the other 18.
Just to clarify, all before you are the 18 units that have not been brought under rent control.
I bobbled that all the way up. Yes, thank you. So moved. Second?
I'll second it just because they're all affordable and I'm yay on that.
All right. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Flora,
We do now.
Yes.
Commissioner Trosas,
Yes.
Commissioner Foster.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. Moving on to item 10C1. May we have the staff report, please?
Commissioners Anthony Fermento, the tenant in Unit 5, filed a rent decrease petition alleging various maintenance conditions and reductions in housing services. The hearing officer granted decreases for some of these conditions. The landlord's agent, Ms. Gestalem, filed an appeal arguing that some of the conditions for which a decrease was granted, notably those arising from water damage in the bathroom, were caused by Mr. Formento's failure to properly ventilate the bathroom. She also complains that he interrupted repairs that the landlord had tried to perform and is likely to do so as they try to comply with the hearing officer's decision. Because a significant portion of the appeal relates to Mr. Formento's purported ongoing interference with repairs, staff contacted Ms. Gestalem and answered her questions on how to seek compliance. She has since filed a request for verification of compliance, which is being reviewed by the hearing officer and which is not a subject of this appeal. At the hearing officer refused any decreases for conditions where the landlord had shown that Mr. Formento's conduct had interfered with repairs. But as to the conditions for which decreases were granted, the repairs show that the maintenance conditions existed because of poor repair work by the landlord's agents and not because of Mr. Formento's conduct. The hearing officer appropriately granted decreases for these conditions. I will go through them. Baseboards, trim, and door jambs, the photos show that they were installed in an unworkmanlike manner throughout the unit, leaving significant gaps between the walls, floors, and trim or baseboard pieces. Most have an excessive amount of paint, or the paint is damaged, or there is no paint. The landlord didn't provide any evidence that these conditions were caused by Mr. Formento's conduct. They were the result of shoddy repairs. So the hearing officer reasonably granted a decrease for them. Paint on bathroom walls. The landlord's crew removed mold from the bathroom walls back in December of last year and repainted the bathroom. A few weeks later, in January, the public health inspector verified that the problems that had been cited had been abated. But a few months later, photos from the hearings investigator show that the two walls in the bathroom the paint on the two walls in the bathroom are bubbling, and there's an area of the wall that appears soft and rotted next to the shower stall. The record did not show that Mr. Formento's conduct had caused these problems. Instead, the record reasonably supports the hearing officer's conclusion that the landlord's crew had failed to remediate the mold problem appropriately in the bathroom, and the paint had prematurely failed within months of its application. The decrease granted is supported by the record. And finally, bathroom flooring. The landlord's crew replaced the floor back in December of last year. However, a few months later, the floor looks damaged between the seams of the tiles. The flooring is taped down or coming up in areas, and caulking has deteriorated with tiles overlapping rather than being flush to one another. The landlord did not produce any evidence at the hearing that Mr. Formento's conduct contributed to this rapid deterioration. Therefore, the decrease granted is reasonably supported by the record. For these reasons, staff recommends that the board affirm the decision.
All right, we do have one request to speak. Mr. Fomento, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Sorry for not dressing nicer. I didn't know this was going to be so formal.
We are super formal.
Yeah.
Kidding.
But yeah, like I've said before, I've had to contact the city multiple times because of harassment. The manager's office, the city attorney's office, the rent control office. At this point, they filed an unlawful detainer. They wouldn't accept my last check, and I just think it's unfair what they've been doing. This has been going on for, I don't know, 2 years now. I mean, the first time they took a jackhammer to my shower with no city permit, and they ripped apart my shower. Then they tried to offer me a buyout that was 33% of the fair market value last summer, and they didn't try and do that through rent control. They tried to, I figured they were just going to give me a bad check that was going to bounce, so I didn't take it. And they keep leaving notices on my door saying that they're going to evict me in 3 days if I don't make these changes. Or the last one, they just said they're terminating my lease and they're going to evict me. And so I have to go to the courthouse tomorrow and to see if they've done anything. And it's upsetting because I would like to move out, but I don't want to be illegally evicted and then have trouble moving into a new place because I have a bad record. I'd just like a fair buyout. And they're not willing to do that. And at this point, they really don't like me. I even had to open up a small claims case last summer because of what was going on. And so I just think it's unfair the way that I've been treated. I've never had this much difficulty living in an apartment before. And so I don't know what to do right now. All of my lifelines are out. But thank you.
Stay there for a moment. We have a couple of questions for you from commissioners. Commissioner Flora?
Yeah, first of all, Mr. Formento, I just want to say how sorry I am that you've had to deal with a lot of what you're talking about. It's unfortunately really out there for a lot of tenants in this city. But my question is, I'm just curious, and this is somewhat leading, but I'm not an attorney, so I can do that. Is one of the reasons I'm suspecting you offered to do the work yourself or have it done was because you weren't happy with the work they had done?
Yes.
So it was more, yeah, okay.
But also because I didn't know the extent of the damage, the last time that they came in, after we got in an argument and they stormed out, I found out during lunchtime when they had taken some of the paste off the walls that there is pink mold inside the walls behind the shower. and I've been having health problems, and I had to buy an air purifier, and it turns out that a lot of them, the purifiers that you can buy on Amazon, are illegal because they emit ozone gas, and ozone gas is toxic, so you have to go on the California.gov website and look up a list of purifiers that are approved by Jerry Brown, and so I had to look up a purifier that was twice as expensive as the one I wanted to buy, and I don't have any money right now. I'm going through bankruptcy too, which is another problem. But yeah, and I had to buy this air purifier, and I have 2 fans running, and it's still around 90 degrees during the summer, this last few years during the heat wave, because I don't have air cooling. And one of the last things that they did is they opened the valve for the hot water in my shower, and my hot water was leaking in my shower. They wouldn't fix it for a month, and that accelerated the growth of the mold, and the mold started getting really bad, and the ceiling in my shower was perspirating. That's how bad it was.
Right.
It was dripping.
No, you've more than answered my question. Thank you. I'm sorry about that. I didn't even know pink mold was a thing. So, wow.
I have a couple of questions. How long have you lived in your unit?
Since June 2009.
Okay. And have you had the same landlord or owner or manager the whole time?
The first landlord was the same, but he was more personable. At least you could meet him. He sold the building in 2014 to a pair of, I guess, what do you call it, investors. And they hired a management company, it's a complete ghost, and they don't tell you anything. I had to go to the county clerk's office in Norwalk and find out that they put the building under a fake LLC and all this other stuff, and just to find out who owned the building.
Just out of curiosity, are you represented by an attorney for your court proceedings?
No, I'm doing the bankruptcy by myself, and the reason I came over here is because
I don't mean the bankruptcy.
I know that, but I mean that is going to tie into this though, the eviction, if they do try and evict me. But I actually just came over.
So we just want you to avail yourself of all of your.
Just for the sake of having for the sake of having a clean record, we should confine ourselves to the issues that are in the appeal.
I'm sorry. I came over here from Legal Aid, and they advised me to come over here. I didn't know it was going to be so formal. I thought it was just going to be in one of the back rooms.
That's all right. We appreciate your comments and for coming
all right.
tonight.
Thank you very much.
All right. Is there any discussion on this item? Yes, Commissioner Trosas.
Is someone from the Lincoln Boulevard LLC here? What? No, he didn't. You didn't ask to speak.
No, he didn't.
Okay. I don't have any questions yet.
All right. If there's no other discussion, then I would entertain a motion on this item.
Yes, Madam Chair.
What?
Oh.
I wanted him to talk to someone from our staff.
Who?
Well, it sounds like the management company appealed, so I guess Mr. Formento. He left, right? Where'd he go? Yeah. Okay. I hopefully. No, I was just hoping
right.
before I didn't realize he was going to walk away that someone could give him some counseling.
Yeah.
All right.
Anywho.
There's about to be a motion?
That's a fair point, Commissioner Trosas. Yes, I identify that the record reasonably supports the decreases granted and move that we accept the staff recommendation that the board affirm the decision.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Can we call the roll, please?
Commissioner Flora.
Yes.
Commissioner Duran.
Yes.
Commissioner Trosas.
Yes.
Commissioner Foster.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. Moving on to item 12A. Can we have a brief staff report?
Yes, I'll be very brief. This item concerns proposed cleanup to regulations 3105, 3106, 3108, 3109, and 3120. These proposed amendments are cleanup amendments to the board's existing surcharge regulations. These proposed amendments affect no change in board practices or the law, but merely conform all surcharge regulations with existing board practices and recently enacted substantive regulations. The proposed regulations also correct minor formatting irregularities and eliminate typographical errors. The most significant cleanup is to regulations 3105 and 3120. As the board has previously observed, all surcharges for school and community college bonds have always included all the bonds currently appearing on the tax bill. But the regulation allowing for the surcharge was adopted in the early 90s and identified only 2 specific bonds. It was never subsequently amended to add the later bonds, even though they were actually being passed through. The proposed cleanup amendment to Regulation 3105 simply clarifies that the school and college bond surcharge includes all the bonds, not just the 2 from the early 1990s. Some months ago, the board debated whether it had the authority to allow surcharges at all, and it ultimately decided that it did. This conclusion was at odds with findings that the board adopted in Regulation 3120. The proposed cleanup to Regulation 3120 eliminates those now outdated findings. The rest of the changes are limited to the correcting of formatting and typographical errors. For example, some missing headings were added where appropriate. In existing Regulation 3106, the word user was left out of stormwater management user fee, so the proposed cleanup amendment would supply the missing word. In the same regulation, subdivision D, paragraph 2 mistakenly refers to school bonds, which is the subject of the preceding regulation. The proposed cleanup would correct that typographical error by substituting school bond with stormwater management user fee. Staff recommends that the board adopt these non-substantive cleanup amendments as shown in the red line version of the affected regulations included in the staff report. Thank you.
All right. We don't have any speakers on this item, so we'll move into discussion. Commissioner Flora.
Just a real easy one. First of all, I think staff did a tremendous job. This is very easy to understand. We knew this was coming and we had to do this formally, administratively. I just can't help but ask, though, on the first page of the exhibit, where the word special is crossed out. I was a Santa Monican for most of these elections, but not for the first couple of them. I want to make sure that we're not nullifying something that may have been a special election. So when it was referred to as special bond, was it a special bond because it was held as a special election versus during a general election? I just want to make sure that we're not.
I don't know, but this would not nullify the surcharge.
It wouldn't matter.
Right.
Okay, great. That's fine. Thank you.
Commissioner Trosis.
I just want to clarify, since this entire 3120 was stricken, and then we have this beginning March 1st, 2018, no cert. I mean, like, I just want to clarify that this is binding upon the entire section and that we're clear that any new tenancies after March 1st, 2018 are not subject to any of these surcharges. Okay.
All right. I'll entertain a motion to move on this item.
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
There's no public comment on this, by the way?
Nope.
Interesting.
All right, there's been a motion and a second, and we call the roll to approve the changes.
Commissioner Duran.
Yes.
Commissioner Trosis.
Yes.
Commissioner Flora.
Yes.
Commissioner Foster.
Yes.
Motion carried.
All right, moving on to item 14A. Request of myself and Commissioner Phyllis to discuss prohibition of rental of controlled units as corporate housing. So the reason Commissioner Phyllis and I brought this item is because some very concerned constituents brought to our attention that there may be such a use of corporate rentals in rent-controlled housing. And since the intent of rent control is to address the housing concerns of our citizens, it would seem that corporate rentals are anathema to members of the community contributing to the community and living in rent-controlled housing in order to achieve that, out of line with our law and our goals. So Commissioner Phyllis and I, because this is a many and varied area of the law, both in the rent-controlled charter capacity and between ourselves and the city, which are separate entities, we conferred extensively with staff and with members of the community on this prior to bringing this item for discussion. And so tonight's goal, so staff actually doesn't usually prepare something, but we've coordinated with them to prepare a little bit for some informational materials. And we're looking to see if there's any consensus tonight among the board members present to continue this discussion at future meetings. So Stephen Lewis will give us some more information on the topic.
It's my understanding that this item results from concerns, both general and with respect to specific properties, about corporate rentals, which are rentals of residential units for longer than 30 days, but on a basis that is still meant to be temporary. Although the board undoubtedly has an interest in ensuring that controlled units are occupied by those whom the rent control is intended to protect, which are those who live in their units permanently as their principal residence, if it decides to act in this area, it should take care to act squarely within its own subject matter jurisdiction. The board should not, for example, purport to regulate land use. Under California law, land use is the use to which land, including any improvement on it, is put. Under California Government Code Section 56800 and the statutes following it within the same chapter, it is the city's planning commission that has the initial authority over land use matters. If the city council fails to create a planning commission, then the authority rests with the council itself. Even when a city council creates a planning commission, final authority over land use matters rests with the council that created it. City Charter Section 1007 establishes the planning commission of the city of Santa Monica, and the municipal code provides for council review of its decisions. So in Santa Monica, it is the planning commission and the city council that have the exclusive authority over how property may be used. And those bodies have already regulated and in fact prohibited the use of residential property in Santa Monica for corporate housing. Municipal Code Section 9.51.020 lists corporate housing as a residential land use. Section 9.51.020 paragraph A2 defines that use as rental housing that has three basic attributes. One, it's designed for stays that last longer than 30 days but that are intended to be temporary. Two, it is intended for those who have primary residence elsewhere. And three, it has at least 2 of 6 specified amenities. Under California law, it's generally true that any land use that is not specifically permitted by local land use regulation is forbidden. By defining corporate housing but not permitting it in any zone, the city has forbidden it. It is also generally true under California law that land uses that began before they were forbidden are allowed to continue as lawful, non-conforming uses. A handful of properties were used for corporate housing before the city defined it as a use, chose not to permit it in any zone, and thereby prohibited it. Those properties and those properties alone may continue to lawfully operate as corporate rentals. It's important to understand, though, that even those that can operate that way can't expand their use or increase the use. The board may neither further regulate corporate housing generally as a land use, nor prohibit corporate housing as a land use where it is grandparented in. But this does not mean that the board has no reason to concern itself with how rent-controlled units are used. The rent control law was enacted by the voters in 1979 in response to a housing shortage. The board is charged with administering the rent control law and ensuring that its intent is effectuated. As the Court of Appeal has observed, the rent control law's intent is very clear. It is to alleviate the hardships caused by the housing shortage and to protect tenants. As the Court of Appeal has also observed, the tenants whom the law is intended to protect are those who are residents of Santa Monica, i.e. those who live in the city on a long-term, full-time basis. To quote the Court of Appeal in Bisno versus Santa Monica Rent Control Board, quote, "The whole tenor of the rent control law is the provision of housing, not ancillary residential rental usage, and to ensure housing for those who occupy their units as their principal place of residence. When an owner rents a controlled unit to persons who are domiciled elsewhere or to a business that permits employees or guests to stay there on a temporary basis, or indeed to any non-human entity which by its nature cannot live in a unit, that unit is not being used for housing as contemplated by the rent control law. The unit is instead being put to an ancillary residential rental use, and thereby exacerbating the housing shortage that the rent control law is intended to alleviate. There's no question that the board has reason to prevent this. The question is how to prevent it. The simplest and most direct way to prevent the use of residential rental units for other than permanent long-term habitation is to forbid any other use. The City Council of the City of West Hollywood has done this. It has defined dwelling unit as a room or group of rooms internally connected rooms that have sleeping, cooking, eating, and sanitation facilities, but not more than one kitchen, which constitute an independent housekeeping unit occupied or intended for use by one household on a long-term basis. That City Council has also expressly outlawed corporate housing, which it has defined as, quote, the temporary occupancy of any dwelling unit by any person, one, who does not intend to use it as their domicile, or who has not entered into a written rental or lease agreement to occupy the unit for at least 1 year, and two, for which the dwelling unit is owned, leased, guaranteed, or made available by a business entity for occupancy by the entity's officers, employees, consultants, vendors, or contractors. It has done these things as part of its zoning ordinance, because these definitions relate to a property's use. As noted above, the board cannot regulate property use in this way. Another possibility would be to adopt a regulation declaring that a failure to rent a controlled unit on a permanent basis to a person occupying the unit as his or her principal residence to be a de facto removal of the unit, which cannot be accomplished except under the limited circumstances specified in the city charter provision governing removals. This approach would have the virtue of specifically targeting the practice of taking units out of circulation as homes, and thereby exacerbating the rental housing shortage, but it might be difficult to craft regulations that would target only the intended problem and not unintentionally address other issues. Although the problem of using controlled rental units for other than permanent housing is a real one, a great deal of thought should be put into how to address that problem without causing new problems. For that reason, if the board wishes to address this issue, I recommend that it agendize for a future meeting not specific proposed solutions to the problem, but a discussion of how best to arrive at those solutions. Thank you.
Thank you for that thorough discussion. And Commissioner Phyllis and I both feel the same way, that the goal, as we enter discussion and public comment, is to find something that's in line with our laws and no further. We'll let the public speak before we have discussion. Is it McGrammer? McGrother. You have 3 minutes.
I should write that out. Where is it? You could write that out, put it on the website, for search engines, and you get a ton of traffic of people looking at exactly these issues and how to understand land use related to rent control law. So I'm just saying, and it was great to meet you at the city council meeting where the summer concert series thing was decided. That was a wild one, Commissioner Foster. So this would be squarely within rent control's legitimate use of municipal police power to stop this, as we're calling it, corporate housing phenomenon. I'm experiencing in my building the 1647 Oceanfront Walk, where we're 2.5 years into 3 years of an 85% construction-related rent decrease, similar to 10th Street, which I saw in the paper, and we are going through it. Lock boxes on every door. It starts to bleed into the less than 30-day stuff. You start to have high-end renters, like women saying to men, "Would you like to come up to the unit now?" The only question becomes, how much money can these people pay us? And it's definitely not their permanent residence. And that's what it is. It's not that is a non-human entity renting the apartment. It's, and domicile gets really hard to define too, but are these permanent residents? They'll say they're here on vacation, but say they're here for more than a month or whatever. It starts to create a lot of problems fast with the character of the building and what people how they react to you and how the management company treats you vis-a-vis these super high-end people. Like, they don't like to see my kids in the building because it's like a 50-year-old man with a 21-year-old girl that won't make eye contact with you. It changes everything fast. That's all.
Thank you for your comments.
Cool.
We're going to go into a little bit of discussion on this item. No, that's it. So, again, I just wanted to stress that Commissioner Phyllis and I wanted to keep this as simple as possible, and with the goal in mind of renting units to natural persons and honoring the intent of the rent control law and preserving our housing stock. That's the intention, and what we'd like to see is if there's a consensus of this body tonight to continue moving this discussion forward in a careful and deliberate manner to see that it's achieved in the best way. Is it a regulation? Is it us going and speaking to other bodies, planning commission or council? Is it all of the above? Is it a resolution to council, to planning commission? These are the things we should take a look at in the coming couple of meetings, and that would be our hope. Commissioner Flora.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Stephen, please take this as a bit tongue-in-cheek, but because I thought your report was incredible. But we did not vote rent control through because there was a housing shortage. We voted rent control through in 1979 because of the similar things that were happening now. A housing shortage was being taken advantage of by huge banking interests and owners, and rents were going through the roof. And it was one of the most inflationary times in American history. But just want to make it clear, but I knew your intent was good. Yes, Commissioner Foster, I absolutely agree we should move forward on this. And for anybody who's expecting decisions and things to be made tonight, the Daily Press was somewhat leading in making it front page news today that this was going to be brought up tonight. And while I appreciate the reporter's coverage very much, this is just a board discussion item right now. We have to elevate it to an administrative item to take action from a parliamentary standpoint. So I hope those of you perhaps viewing at home, our multitudes of viewers, aren't disappointed. We will bring this up again, I'm sure. It is happening. It's really happening rather dismissively on the part of corporations that are allowing this to happen, and the rental management companies that are allowing this to happen. However, while I know our general counsel is always wants to make sure we're only dealing in our jurisdiction, I talked to a friend of the board today who reminded me that I think it's really important that we actually be active collaborators with our friends in the planning department and on the city council, so that we make sure our side of the table is taken care of, but we do it in a way that I think maybe we're all moving forward in the right direction. So I would just encourage actually not walls, but a collaboration with those bodies and the staff of those bodies going forward. But I know we won't really be belaboring this tonight, but I am really glad that Commissioner Foster and Commissioner Phillips brought this up, because it's been on my mind for years, and I'm realizing really how bad it is now. So thank you. That's all I've got.
Thank you. Commissioner Terosas.
Okay, quick question for council, and maybe I don't know if we know, but what's our current land use regulation around boarding homes?
I don't
Are
know
they
specifically
permitted?
what
Are they
it is.
permitted within the city?
Boarding houses? I don't know. Do you know, Tracy?
It's okay. I was just curious.
On the same page.
Okay, as corporate homes, and currently, who enforces the? Is it
Code enforcement and the city attorney's office.
So theoretically, looking to see if there's any corporate housing out, and if they're not used in concert with what they're zoned for, that would be code enforcement.
Yes.
Okay. I guess I would just say that, I joined the rent control board because I believe in preserving the character of this community. And I think that, rent control is an inherently stable form of housing. And I think to our last speaker's point, I want to ensure that the character of these homes and these family dwellings and community contributing individuals are able to feel comfortable in their home, and additionally that we are preserving the supply of rent controlled housing. And just like city council moved to ban short-term rentals for specific reasons, I think this is something that needs to be carefully looked at. So I definitely applaud you for bringing this forward and look forward to hearing more.
Thank you. Commissioner Duran.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis, at the end of your presentation, you had offered a recommendation for us to consider. Could you repeat that? I didn't quite get it.
I simply said that if this is a subject matter that the board wants to deal with, that rather than give direction to staff now about what the approach would be, to just have a future discussion about how to grapple with the issue and in the future discuss what the right approach would be. As Commissioner Flora mentioned, an approach may be there are three possible approaches. One approach is simply defining the issue and presenting that to a body with the jurisdiction to deal with land use, to the extent that it's principally a land use issue. The other is doing something in concert with those bodies. And the third possibility would be doing something alone, although what the board can do alone is necessarily more at the margins of the issue. So anyway, all I was suggesting was that the board very carefully at a future meeting consider what the best way is, what the best way into the problem is.
Okay. And so to follow that up, I'm just trying to think practically, how do we get to that point from here?
If the board wants to discuss it, then at the next meeting, or whatever meeting it comes up at, presumably the next one, there would be an administrative item that would present various possible approaches. And it's possible that there would be additional meetings at which those approaches would be refined or winnowed in subsequent meetings.
Okay. Hearing my fellow colleagues speak on this matter and the research that was done, thank you very much. I'm comfortable and enthusiastic about moving it in that direction, stepping it up, if you will. I don't know if that calls for a formal vote or not. If so, then I'd like to move to do that. If it's just a consent, then we can just do that too.
You can
We
just
have
be
a couple
done
more
by consensus.
couple more comments.
Oh, sure. I'm
in
sorry.
the queue. That's all right. Thank you for your support, Commissioner Flora.
Yeah, just real quick, in my original comments, I'm sorry, I heat brain, I forgot. I did also want to encourage that as we bring this back, that we also get a little more information too. I'd like, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, my feeling is that this is a real issue out there. I'd like to know how much of one, if we can get into any more statistics, we think it might be, for example, and other maybe information that it might be good to know moving forward as we consider what to do. All right, thank you.
Commissioner Trosas.
And along those lines, I would like to see any sort of information we have about the effect on the rent-controlled housing stock specifically, but then more generally, what's the ratio of, or the percentage of units that are potentially corporate housing, and of that, which ones are in rent-controlled buildings and which ones are, or do we know that already?
No, and in fact, I wanted to respond to both Commissioner Flora and Commissioner Trosas to say that one of the things that, if the board wants to discuss this, that I would recommend is that the board discuss ways to, I will not be able to come up with the answer to those questions in the next month. And so one of the things that, that if the board wants to discuss this, that we will recommend that the board do is consider ways to first to define the exact parameters of the problem. I mean, exactly what the problem is, and then to consider ways to define the scope of the problem.
Right.
So that's something that
a subcommittee.
For example,
perhaps.
we're talking
on Saturday.
Or talking with other bodies that may have that information, but I'm just telling you this now because I wouldn't want you both to say those things and then feel let down that I hadn't provided those at the next meeting.
Can we also get more information to the extent it's available as to what other jurisdictions besides West Hollywood are doing to deal with this? Okay, that would be great. And I'm definitely interested in seeing what we could do about imposing specific regulations on the rent controlled. I know it's a land use issue, but yes, I'm looking forward to the additional information.
Great. Well, I thank everyone for their support. I know I speak for Commissioner Phyllis, who feels the same, and we are very much looking forward to finding out what the scope of this issue is and what we may, if anything, do about it in order to achieve the goals of all of us on this board and in this city, the stated goals of every agency in the city, which is to preserve the character of our full-time residents. So we thank you very much. Commissioner Trosas, do you have something else before we?
On a different,
After okay.
Yeah.
So I think there's obvious consent among a consensus of the board to move ahead and bring information back at our next meeting to further the discussion. Thank you all very much. And Commissioner Trosis.
Yeah, I would also like to add that we get an update on the Ellis report. I know I sound like a broken record, but can we please get an update on that? Because I think that hopefully, maybe we're hoping for too much at this point, but I want to help inform some of our decision making that way.
Yes, we will. Commissioner Phyllis also inquired about that, so we will gather what information we can for you in terms of an anticipated timeline for a subsequent report.
And should we also do an update on the technology subcommittee at a upcoming meeting, or are we not at that point yet?
Well, we're still in progress of reviewing the responses to our RFP.
Oh, okay.
We're going to have some presentations in the
Okay.
coming future,
Okay.
so we're still a little early for that, but we will be back with you with more information about that. Great.
All right. I would move to adjourn this meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Short.